Right, where do I start? I bought a Category S E93 M3, the one with the special engine, the 4-litre high-revving V8. This is exciting, the cheapest coupe on eBay. We finally found a donor car. Even though I've got two cars, I only ever wanted one, my perfect M car. Using the lightweight chassis of the E86 Z4 Coupe, I plan on integrating the M3's lightweight V8 and its hardware. Now let's see if this is even going to work. Now it's not been simple. Basically, it's a right headache. I don't know exactly how I'm going to move forward, but one step at a time, here goes nothing. We're going to get there. To be perfectly honest, I'm attempting this quite challenging build in a 6x4 gala tent, so a marquee. The Alps, endless roads carved into stone, calling for speed and thrill. Twisting passes, towering peaks, the ultimate playground for a machine with soul. But this machine is not ready. Not yet. Once again, we pick up from where we left off. At the end of the last episode, I managed to get all 4 drive shafts out of the assemblies, both from the M3 and the Z4. Before we get the components under the car though, I want to give these a good clean up, as I don't want to go through the grief I did in the last episode to get them off. There is a whole lot of surface rust covering the splines. The easiest thing to do is to get some spray on it and then get a wire brush and really work at it. Like I said before, I've never quite seen CV joints so rusty, so it took a bit of work to get these cleaned up. I have only cleaned up the Z4 ones, as these are the ones we're going to use in the hubs. The M3 ones are obsolete, so I don't need them. I don't need to clean them up anymore. However, I do need to use these joints from the M3 ones. So in essence, I'm going to be joining these parts to this section. Before I can start measuring up these, however, we need to get everything on the car. I start with the jack. I get it under the rear of the car. The first thing I need to do is actually take something back off. I need to lower the diff down so it frees up enough space so I can get the bolts out that hold the lower arms in on the suspension units. The fact that we've got such a large diff in a small carrier, it means there's not much space around it. So when it comes to building this back up or taking it apart, we have to think things through step by step so we don't get caught out. Once all the bolts from the differential mounts are free, we can lower it down. I'm now going to attempt to get the hub assembly on this near side. I don't know how it's going to go with just trying to lift it up and put everything in place at once, but we are going to find out. Ow, 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 ow. I need to put the lower arm in the subframe before I do that step. Ow! Oh, come on. Just had it aligned. Ah! Ow, 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 ow. Ah, close. I'm just going to prop it up for now and then I can get the bolt in on the inside properly. I can't see to align it at the moment. As you can probably tell, it's quite awkward trying to hold the weight and be able to see what I'm doing further in under the car. I get it supported and then I can see it properly and we can align it to get the bolt in. Now I go fetch the remaining hub assembly for the offside. Having learnt from the other one, I use a slightly different technique. I support the bulk of it on my lap, then get the lower arm up into the subframe. That helps take the weight a bit. Then I can think about locating the hub to the spring platform. Then with that in place, I can use my right arm to get the trailing arm located in the chassis. Once I get 3 bolts finger tight, I can buzz them up. I have both hub assemblies on now. There is no point of putting the springs on or the dampers, as I'm going to set the height of the wheel in the arch roughly where it's going to sit, and then we can calculate how we're going to do the drive shafts from there. The next thing to do is to get the differential back in, so then we can start figuring out how we're going to do this. You can see as I put this M3 diff back into the rear subframe how tight for space we really are. We still need to come up with a good way of reinforcing this subframe while still retaining some rear strut braces that come factory on the Z4. With the bolts back in and holding the diff, I can lower the jack down. The differential is bolted up tight now, so I can put my attention onto the M3 shafts. I need to take the outer CV joints off, so the units are small enough to get them under the car. because as they are now, you can see they are a lot bigger than the Z4 ones. So if I take these outer boots off, take the joints out, and then hopefully we can get them bolted on that side. Once I get the drive shaft bolted up into the vise, I start removing the rubber boot clips that hold it to the shaft and the CV joint. Once the smaller one is off, I put my attention on the thicker one. Once the clips are removed, I can pull the boot off and expose the inside of the joint. Then I can get a piece of wood and a hammer, and while striking the center part, the strong part of the joint itself, I should be able to knock the joint off by shocking it over the snap ring on the end of the shaft. I don't seem to be having too much luck with these parts. Once again, I struggle and fail to remove them. They do seem to be way too hard to get off. I try a couple of different techniques, using the joint itself as like a slide hammer, then hitting it with another piece of wood. I wind the hub nut back onto the drive shaft, put an adjustable spanner on the end. I try hitting that with a sledgehammer, still no luck. I abandon that one, try the other one just to see if that one comes free for any reason, but still no luck. I was going to save the CV joints on the M3, but I don't see any point really, so it's war. I've played softball for long enough now. It's time to really get the hammer to it. I grab the sledgehammer and then hit the joint as hard as I dare. This time simply striking the casing. I don't care if it dents now, but still it doesn't budge. In the end, I resorted to cutting it with an angle grinder. Once I cut through it enough, it finally did come apart. Then quickly it became apparent why I couldn't split it. The fact is, it's not actually held in with a snap ring. So that's interesting. The whole time I thought it was a snap ring in there, and it's not. It's a circlip. How are you supposed to remove that then? Well, it turns out you're not. These drive shafts are not designed to be taken apart, which personally I think is a pretty stupid idea. What's wrong with being able to change a CV joint? All right. At least that's off. I think I know how this should be done now. I give the spines on the end a bit of a clean up so we don't get grease everywhere when we go to test fitting it. I then move on to the other shaft, believing I'm clever enough to actually work my way around the casing to try and pry the metal outside off the inner. However, this didn't work and I actually ended up having to cut slits in it with the angle grinder again, just to pry that casing off. And even with the cuts I made in it, it was still a challenge to pull this apart. Once I did get the casing off, however, I could simply remove the circlip, not the snap ring, then pull all of the components off the drive shaft. What a mess. Now I have both of these partially stripped down drive shafts, we can get them tested on the car. Bloody hell, look at the size of that thing. Crikey. Let's try and get him out. I just got him on my broom and I put him outside and he's flown away. Back to the pond. It's the next day and you may have noticed there's a distinct lack of drive shafts here. Now there are some positives and negatives, whichever way you look at it. I've massively overlooked something, but there's also a really good lucky strike to me that hopefully will save a lot of time and money. I'll explain. I'll try and explain this as simply as I can. These M3 shafts are not made to be maintainable. So you can't take the joint off, say you did a CV joint, it's not designed to just take it off and replace it, because the caps that hold it all together are one time, basically there's a metal ring that you have to destroy to pull it off. So the same goes for the Z4 shafts, in fact. I've just done a bit of digging and they're not maintainable either, so I haven't tried to strip those down. But it has foiled my plan, which was to, like I said, use half of the M3 shaft so it can bolt straight to the diff, and then the Z4 half can go into the hubs because I'm running the Z4 hubs. So all the suspension works on this coupe. Now, the massive benefit that I have just noticed is the differential that came out of the car, so this is the Z4 one, is exactly the same width as the M3 diff that's on the car now. So I have just had a little play around. Where's a torch? And I magically managed to align it perfectly where the Z4 shafts just fit straight in. The only hurdle we have now is the bolting pattern is slightly smaller, or quite a bit smaller, from the Z4 to the M3. So in my mind, if I can make a adapter plate that can either, I don't know how we're going to do it, but if I can get that to work, then it means I can just run standard Z4 shafts, which obviously is a lot easier and a lot more cost effective. I'll do a bit more digging and let's see if we can come up with an idea of how to get this bit sorted out. I believe that the method I just proposed will work. To get more intel on that, however, I'm going to make a template that mirrors exactly the shape of this flange. So in order to do that, I've got some paper. It's a bit arts and crafts. I'm going to get a piece of paper. I'm going to carefully just rub my mucky fingers over it. In fact, it just moved, so I'm going to start again. But you get the idea. Got to really mucky up my fingers to get a nice contact patch. And I might even get a couple of bolts to hold it in place. No, it's not going to work. I resort to just trying to keep the paper as flat as I can on the part while I rub my fingers around to make the marks. It doesn't have to be super accurate. It will just be a useful guide to see if my idea is possible. They probably don't teach you this at electric vehicle, mechanical, electric engineering school anymore. There we go, look. Perfect template. With the outline marked out in dirt on the paper, I can now simply cut it out with a pair of scissors. Now if I can fold this perfectly in half, I can then simply use the scissors and cut around, and then it should all be aligned, but it's easier said than done. With a couple of reference marks opposite each other, it should be a bit easier now. I fold it in half and then cut the center section out. Look at that, eh? Now I'm going to trace this out on some cardboard. I need to make my template a bit stronger than just that thin piece of paper, so I can move it around under the car without it getting distorted or destroyed. I trace the shape out on a piece of card, then mark out the center holes where the bolts locate through the flange. Once I've done that, I can bore them out with a drill. I know I should be using a punch, but I don't have one. All that's left to do now is to cut it out with my titanium scissors. It's not the best template, but it will do for now. I just want to offer it up to the M3 diff and just see exactly where it would potentially sit in relation to the adaptation plate. I appreciate you can't really see with the reflection of this light, but I'm just going to have a quick look. I'm sure my machinist can magic it together. That's the sort of thing we're dealing with. I have only measured the thickness of the differentials roughly, so I don't know if they're 100% the same width overall. Now, I need to work out if I can actually have any kind of spacer, or it has to be the same, it has to end up the same thickness essentially, if that makes sense. So in order to do that, I'm going to get the wheel sitting roughly where it's going to be at ride height, and I can work that out by the diameter of the wheel and then work it off the arch gap I want roughly. And then once it's in place with that shaft back in there, I can see how much play there is either way on the shafts on both sides. And if we do have a bit of tolerance to play with, it may aid us when it comes to making up these adapters. I first take the weight off the suspension assembly. Then I can remove the block that's holding it up. I can then lower it down enough to get the drive shaft up into place. Once I've done that, we can move on. Right, let's get the wheel height. From memory, doing the wheel diameters, I think the standard Z4 is 25 inches, the Z4M is 26, the M3 E9X is 26.3. Now I want to run a smaller wheel, so we talk about the final driver ratios are going to be lower, so we'll have shorter gearing. In theory, if I have a 25.5 rear tyre, and it'll fill the arches a bit better. than the standard Z4. So 25.5 divided by 2 is 12.75. Is that right? Oh, I just messed that math up. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's been a long day. So, just go up a fair way. That's made the drive shaft slightly inverted. Not a big deal. 12.75. Oh, that's actually quite a nice distance there, roughly, because it's 12.75. So that gives us about that much arch clearance. It can go up a fraction more. Maybe like a spanner more. Yeah, that's the ballpark anyway. That's accurate enough for me to test the drive shaft play. The angle of the drive shaft is pretty nice. Not bad at all. And there is adequate play back and forth. So I'm very happy with that, and we can probably ideally have no spacer really, so that's good. Good news. I'll double check the other side. With the drive shaft on the near side, I already have it sat in the flange on the differential, so I focused my attention on getting the ride height exactly the same as the offside. Now we can see if there is the same gap between the hub and the differential on this side. There is slightly more of a gap this side. One thing I didn't know is that where the centre of the diff is, it may be slightly different to the standard setup when the Z4 one was in there, so that is one variant that could be a factor. The other side is pretty much bang on perfect. This side there is probably a slightly too big a gap, so what I'll do is I will replicate the play from what's on the offside on the near side and then measure the gap that is extra and then take note of that. And then I think the next step is to get the diff off, drive shafts out. I know what we have to do. I'll take it to my wizard machinist and see what he says, along with the prop shafts. I have spent a bit of time checking. I'm happy with the setup here. I have measured the extra gap on this side. It's about 3mm, so I have to bear that in mind. And the other question is, are these shafts actually going to hold up to 400 horsepower? The standard car is 260, so it's quite a step up. But with the fact that these are completely standard, no mods to the shaft at all, if I do go down this route, then it's quite a cost-effective way of replacing shafts if they start to go. The downside is I did completely destroy these M3 ones, which are quite expensive even second-hand. But hindsight is a wonderful thing. Much better. Before I send this off with the rest of the bits, I need to remove the flanges. I think I'm going to try and get rid of the M clunk in this diff anyway, which is basically slight play in this flange, more so on this side. This is a limited slip diff, On that side there's a viscous pump, so basically when the wheels turn at alternate rates, so one speeds faster than the other, i.e. in a corner or loss of traction, it builds up pressure in the pump and then engages the clutch plates, which are on that side. There is a modification you can get, which is basically, I think it's a clutch set, and then some preload, the correct amount of preload on that clutch. There is also an upgraded washer that's just slightly domed, that takes up the play in this flange too. So that might be a good upgrade while it's all apart. In order to get the flanges off, I'm going to try and use the now obsolete, destroyed M3 shafts as a slide hammer. I'm just going to bolt it in a few turns and then see what happens. Oh, that worked. Easy. I removed the bolts so we can do the same to the other side. Simple but effective. Let's spin him around and do the other side. Alrighty. I will remove the flanges from the Z4 differential as well, just in case they can be utilised when it comes to machining, fabricating, adapting these pieces, whether it can be cut off flush and then inserted in the middle and welded in. I'm not entirely sure if they're cast, if they're weldable at all. Not my area of expertise, so I'm going to take them along just in case we need them. The next thing I'm going to tackle is cut the spacers out for the lower arms at the front of the car. I have 4 spacers to make, like I said, and then I'll worry about drilling the holes in once I get the shapes cut out. I start by cutting out the basic shape. I make sure to cut it a little proud, as we can easily use a file to get these allium pieces looking nice. Once the 4 spacers are cut out, I get them stacked up, put them on the vise, and then use the old lollipop mount to mark the center holes where I need to drill them through the new spacers. I use a small drill bit to start with to try and get it as accurate as I can. As I drill through this thick stack, I'm trying to make sure the drill is parallel and vertical, as by the time I get through to the other side, it could be way out. It worked out well, so I size up the drill bit until we can get the bolt through. I think these turned out pretty well. Nice lightweight, simple adapters. Now let's see how they're going to fit on the car. The poly bushes have arrived for the lower arms, but before I put them on, I just want to make sure I'm 100% happy with my modification to the ends. I want to slide them on further, so I just want to make sure that the profile is completely even before I attempt to put them on. Put simply, if I take too much material off, the bush will sit loose and won't be right on the arm. If I take too little off, I won't be able to press the bush on enough for it to be in the right place to bolt up onto the chassis. We have the new scarily cheap lollipop bushes. I mean, as long as it's actually polyurethane, then it should be fine. I put some of the grease from the little sachet that came with the parts on the end of the arm, then simply press the bush on. Maybe this went on a bit too easy. Okay, let's offer it up to the car. Okay, we need to go more, quite a bit more. To be honest, now it's just a case of trial and error. I want to get it pretty much exactly aligned so there's no stress on any of the joints on this lower arm. In order to get this bush in the rear mount further on the arm, I need to fully remove it again, then carefully go at it with the grinder again. I have removed some more material from this arm. Let's see if we're in luck this time. By placing it face down on the vise, I can generate enough force to push the arm down. It's looking pretty good to me. I don't know yet if I'm going to have one spacer or two spacers in there. We're simply just going to have to try it on the car. I choose one out of the 4 to start with, place it between the subframe and the mount, then hopefully the bolter lines up through perfectly. That's the first one in, then the other. It's looking quite good. Even with just one spacer, we have some clearance on the exhaust as well, which is good. And crucially, the clearance on the subframe is looking good too. There's still plenty of travel. I think if I've got that much travel, it'll be a Dakar machine. I like that. Let's do the same to the other side. I've got the near side on, it's looking good too. There's slightly less clearance from the manifold to the rear bush there, but overall it's good clearance on the subframe, which is important. I'm happy to move on and say this issue is sorted. I'm going to start putting more parts back on the car. I start with the steering rack, which was probably the first big challenge we had with the build. I tried to fit it on with the subframe bolted into place. Remember now, the engine is bolted down on its brackets. So unfortunately, there is not enough room now to slip the steering rack up into place. As the clearances are so fine, I decide to support the engine, then start to remove the bolts to the subframe in order to drop it down low enough to fit the steering rack in. With the subframe partially removed, I try again, but it's still looking like it's not quite enough. After fully removing the subframe bolts on the one side, it did actually go into place. So then quickly I could get the bolts back in and start doing the subframe back up tight to the chassis legs. With it all up tight again and the engine safely supported, I can now bolt the steering rack to the subframe. It's a little tricky as there are some spacer washers that need to go in between the frame and the rack itself. I do plan on welding permanent spacers in when it comes to final fabrication, so I don't have to go through this awkwardness again. Before too long, it's bolted up into place. At this point, I get the offside suspension assembly and loosely get it bolted onto the car. I do the top mount up tight to hold it in place. I then move on to another bulky component around the engine. I get the alternator back on. The reason why I'm putting everything back on the car is I need to mock everything up when it's in place. The steering rack, for example, I need to check where it fouls the chassis leg so I can mark it out before the engine comes out, so we can do the modifications to the leg. Another thing with the steering rack, I want to make sure the control arms align properly. So I've just put the upright back on to see exactly where it meets the ball joint there. And I've checked the alignment and it's looking pretty good. I just need to remove the ones I've cut off, the M3 ones, and then get suitable ones that fit this Z4 hub. Even if the gearbox has to go up or down to fine tune the alignment of the drivetrain, we know the engine is going to be approximately here. That's why I've got the alternator back on. I want to build up the front end, and then eventually we'll get the Z4 clip, so the front carrier that holds the radiator and everything else. We'll get that bolted on and then see how we're going to fit the M3 cooling package, as well as oil coolers, the radiator, and all the other bits and pieces. I start by mounting the front support carrier. This holds things like the radiator, the lights, all the bits and pieces at the front of the car. I first need to remove the bolts I put back in the chassis and into the carrier so I can fix this part together. Once I've done that, I can get it offered up. Then I buzz all of the nuts and bolts up to get it up flush and tight. The big question is, does this M3 cooling pack fit in the front of the Z4 frame? Let's see. Oh, kind of. It's just about clearing the frame on this side, but on the near side it's just on top by about 3 or 4 millimeters, so it's a bit too wide. However, I don't know how much of this I'm going to use. I'm going to take the AC unit off, so I think I'm going to pull this back out, take it apart, figure out what I need to use, what I don't need, and then hopefully I can get away without cutting into this frame. I carefully remove the radiator out of the car. I want to avoid damaging anything at this point, as new, these parts are expensive to replace. I put it up on the bench and then start taking the cowling off that was fouling the front of the frame. By removing this plastic side cover, it should fit in much better. Once that piece is off, I can then pull the power steering cooler out of the way. Then I look about taking the AC condenser off. I will do away with that altogether as it is no longer required. Once I remove the locking screw for the plastic cover on that side, I can pull the assembly off. We won't be needing that again. I inspect the condition of the radiator itself. Apart from a bit of dirt, it's actually looking in quite good condition. I then grab the power steering cooler again to see if I can easily mount it without using those plastic covers that I just took off. Now the radiator and fan is a lot less bulky, I can get it back in the car, and as you can see, there's a lot more room to play with. We should be able to set this up nicely. To get this radiator in the optimum position, we first need to get the rest of the front end together. To start with, we need to get the crash bar back on, and if you are screaming at the screen now, yes, I know it's upside down. I dig the front bumper out and then try to fit it to the car. I soon realised though that the radiator is sat too far down and it's fighting against it, so first I need to take the radiator back out, and when I try to fit it again, it still wouldn't fit. I was wondering why the bumper wouldn't fit, and I think I've put this, well I know I've put this upside down. Looking at it now, it's dead obvious it is upside down. It doesn't look right at all, but cut me some slack. It has been over half a year since I took this car apart. I flip it round, put the bolts back in, and then guess what? The bumper fits perfectly. I replace all the screws along the top of the bumper. I then try and centralise it to get a decent panel gap either side, referencing the front wings. Then I nip the bolts up to hold it in place. Now I have the front bumper and the crash bar bolted up to the car. I have a framework to work within. I need to figure out exactly where the radiator is going to bolt to, how I'm going to mount it, and also I need to figure out the coolers, where they're going to go. I have less room at the front of this car, certainly in front of the arches I think, than the M3. So it's going to be a case of methodically going through it, figuring out what's the best layout, and then start to make some custom brackets that will hold everything to the car. When I first took the M3 apart, I couldn't get the engine oil cooler off. One of the bolts, the threads that were inserted in the plastic guard, were just rounding off. Now I need to mop this oil cooler up on the Z4. I need to cut the bolt off to get it free. While I try not to set fire to the M3 crash panel, that I think is made of carbon or some composite, it soon comes off and we can get it inside. To bring us all up to speed, let's summary of where we are at. We have this big hole in the front of the car where I need to put all the stuff for the cooling in, including the radiator, which is the standard setup from the M3. I want to put the power steering cooler back in. I have found one of the lines for that, one is still missing. Those are the lines over there. I need to fit the transmission cooler, which is actually quite controversial because these only typically fitted to the automatic gearboxes. However, I have the setup, this was in the front wing of the M3 and it was plumbed in using the sort of a first version of the standard engine oil cooler. That is the main engine oil cooler that I have set up now, and that was plumbed into the car. But having checked the part numbers on these pipes, these are actually an engine oil cooler part number, but they were running the cooler that goes to the transmission. So it's obviously been retrofitted, and I think some of the casing on the transmission shares the same machining as the automatic gearbox. So I can only presume that it's been retrofitted as like an upgrade. So we have some transmission cooling. All of this has to be plumbed in the right place. The engine oil cooler needs to go ideally running along there so it gets the most amount of airflow. That's the main part for the water, the radiator itself. And then we need to find out where we're going to fit this transmission cooler, because as you can see there isn't much ducting where it was on the M3. It's a good time to do all this work at the front end now while the drivetrain parts are being fabricated. There are a lot of things to set up here. I need to find a lot of parts too. Either way, we're going to get it done. If you enjoyed the episode, give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments or advice about the build, leave the comments down below. Go subscribe and I'll see you very soon.